Okay, so the first step is to understand a little bit about tables, and in particular tables when it comes to HTML code. So a table essentially is made up of rows and columns. So I'm going to draw a very basic table here. It's a 3x3 table, and 3x3 means it's going to have 3 rows and 3 columns. Okay, so these are rows that way, and these are columns going down. Now, the first thing that we need to keep in mind and always remember, especially when it comes to tables and HTML code, is the fact that every row must have the same amount of columns. You cannot have one row with more columns than the other. It may look like it is sometimes, it is different, but the structure of the table is always the same. For example, the structure of this table is a 3x3 table. You may see sometimes that the first row may, let me just try and undo that a bit. The first row may actually look like this. So it takes the whole width of the table, making it look like this is one cell. In fact, it's not. What we're actually doing, we're merging these 3 cells together. Okay, so the number of columns in this row is still 3. If, for example, we have something that looks like this, okay, so here we've got 1, 2, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. On the other ones, we've got 3 columns. So this basically means that this table is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. It's not 3. And these ones here, these 2 columns here have been merged together, and these 2 have been merged together. In the case of having multiple rows, same rule applies. You cannot have more rows on one area than another area. So for example, here I've got 2 rows, whereas here I've only got 1 row going across. That basically means that here, these ones here, this is actually, let's use red again, splitting. This is the correct number of rows. So that's 1 row, 2, 3, 4 rows. So this is actually a 4x4 table. We've got 4 columns and 4 rows, but we've simply merged some of those cells together. Okay, so here we've actually merged the 2 rows. We've merged those together here, and we've merged them together here. So here we've merged the rows, the 2 rows, which are separated here, and the 2 columns. Okay, here we've only merged the 2 rows. So you need to remember that rule, because if you have to design a table in HTML and it looks something like this, then you need to be able to identify how many rows and how many columns this is actually made up of. And the only way to do that is to go to each border, horizontal and vertical. Let's say this looked like this as well. Okay, and extend those lines. So I would do this like this. So here's my one line, here's another line, here's another line, and another line, and another one. Here I've got a column line, here is a column line, here is a column line, and here is a column line. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So this table structure is actually 4 rows and 3 columns, and that will allow me to create a table that looks like this. Okay, so that's a really easy trick to figure out the exact size of a table, and then you're going to be able to merge the cells accordingly to get the shape that you want. Okay, the next thing that we need to learn about tables is the different properties involved in the table. So here's a really nice diagram, and we can see here on the outside, this is the border of the table going around here, going all the way around. Okay, and that's what contains the table. So that's this shape here, the outside border of the table. Now this is a 2x2 table. We've got 2 rows and we've got 2 columns. So this is the table border. Inside the table we now have rows. So one row is going to look is this one here, and we can see that row there is made up of 2 columns. So that's our one row here. So I'm just going to separate this with a dotted line. Okay, and inside here we've got 2 table data. So here's my first one. I call it table data. It's actually a cell, but in HTML it's known as a TD, which is a table data. So here's my first cell. I'm simply copying the picture which is next to me on the left. And what do we notice here? We've got a distance between these 2 cells. We've got a vertical, or actually a horizontal distance between these 2 cells. And we've got the same distance in the other 2 cells as well. Now that horizontal distance there is actually known as your cell spacing. Okay, it's the distance between the 2 cells. So as you make the cell spacing, here it is, cell spacing, it's actually outlined there. As you add another column, it's going to have a bit of distance, which is going to be represented by the cell spacing. So if you put that to 0, these 2 lines here will actually be touching these 2. Okay. Now you've also got the vertical cell spacing as well, which is this distance over here. That one, and that as well is cell spacing. And you can have different values for the horizontal and the vertical cell spacing, and we're going to see that once we start looking at the Dreamweaver, the program we're going to be using to be modifying the style sheet for tables. So that's cell spacing, and we can also see we've got cell spacing here as well, okay, going around the border area of our table. The next thing that we want to have a look at is the inside of the table data. This is where we actually write the data, and that's your cell border here. Okay, so this is my area here. So if I was to write the word here, hello, and over here the word world, so that is the content of the table data or the cell. Now, just like Microsoft Word, when we're actually creating a document, we set those page margins. The reason we set the page margins are so we have a bit of area around the page, the top, the bottom, the left and the right. So that just makes for easier reading, it makes for easier binding, it makes for easier printing, so we don't have the text going all the way to the edge of the page. And we do the same with the contents of each cell or each table data. And that's known as cell padding. It's a padded area which goes around each cell. So if I was to do this, this is my cell padding area here. And that means in this area, which I'm going to highlight here, in this area here, that's a margin. You cannot type anything in that area there. That's your padded area. By increasing the cell padding, you're actually reducing the area where you can type data. Why do we need it? Well, if we think about a table like this, if we have a table without any cell spacing, then our cells are going to be very, very close to each other. And if there's no padding, so that's going to be, let's say, there. If there's no padding, then the words are going to start, I'm going to write this in really big words, it's going to start all the way from the edge, and that's going to go all the way to there, and then the next one, I'm just going to put world and hello this time, I've gone the wrong way around, it's going to be there, and it looks like that is actually touching nearly. Okay, so we need to have that cell padding to make sure the text fits nicely in the table or in the cells. Okay, the next thing that I want to have a look at, this is the final thing. This is the border collapse. What is border collapse? Well, we can see here that we've got this double line. So when this table is finished and we don't have any lines here, it's going to look like this. So if the border is actually visible, we've got the thickness for the border, then each table data or each cell is going to have its own border, creating this double line that we can see between the table datas and the table border itself. So you can see you've got a double line here, a double line here, a double line here, and you get these double lines. Okay, in fact, I'll show you what it looks like on my next slide. You can see here we've got all these double lines. Can you see that? And that's because border collapse is set to separate. If we make border collapse true, this very same table will now look like this. We collapse the borders so we don't get the double lines. We get a single line. In other words, these lines here, which we circled, are merged together and they become one line. Okay, so that is border collapse equals collapse. And again, we're going to see this in the style sheet when we start working on the style sheet in Dreamweaver. So that's everything we need to know about tables as of now. We need to know rows, columns. We need to know that we must have in every row the same amount of columns, and in every column must have the same amount of rows. The only reason it looks different is because we merge rows, we merge cells together, so we get the style of table that we want. And the next thing is we need to understand the difference between cell padding, that's like the margins of a Word document. We need cell spacing, that is the distance between the cells and the border of the table. And the last one that we need to know is the border collapse is either true, in other words collapse, or border collapse is equal to separate. In other words, the borders of each entity, each table data is separate, so you get the double lines. So let's now go and start analyzing a table and the respective code used to create that table. So here we've got a table which is a 3 by 3, 3 rows, 3 columns, and we can see inside each cell or inside each TD, as we're going to see now, we've got some text, and the text is actually the word cell and then the position of that cell. So this is cell row 1 column 1, this is row 1 column 2, this is row 1 column 3, this one for example is row 3 column 2. Okay, so that's row 1, 2, 3, column 1, 2, 3. And the reason why I've done this is so that we can see where the position of each cell is represented inside the code. So let's start analyzing the code now. So the first thing we're going to have a look at is this portion here. So we've got the entire table held within this table tag. And we can see the tables tag begins here where it opens, and then that switch table here is where it closes. So whenever we see this switch, that's where a tag closes. So we can see it will look like this. It will have the chevron like that, then the command of the tag, the switch, and then the close. So all of them open and then close. So then we've got the table body tag. Now the table body tag starts from here. You can see it says T body, and that goes all the way down to the bottom there. Now, the table itself, what is used to create the table, begins and ends within these two table body tags. So here is where the table body begins, between those two chevrons, and here we've got switch T body. Now, the first row is represented where the first TR opens, and we're going to actually draw this out as we go along. So here's the first TR, that's where it opens, and here is where it closes. You can see that switch. So let's start where the TR opens. So we're going to start from here. It starts from TR. That's where my row begins. Now then I've got a TD table data tag. You can see that starts there and it ends here. Okay, so that looks like this. So I've got TD. That starts from there. That's where my TR started. Okay, then I've got in between that, I've got the text cell 11, 11, and then it's switch TD. So that's where the TD closes. Then I've got another TD which opens up. Here it is here. And then it closes here. So, and then I'm going to just carry on. And that's going to be another TD. Cell 1, 2, close or switch TD. And then the last one is going to be open TD. That's going to be cell. Let's see if I can squeeze that in. 1, 3. Actually, I can't squeeze it in, so I'm just going to continue down here. I'm just going to put /TD, and then it ends the TR. That one there. Switch TR. So that representation is actually this. That's the one row with the 3 TDs inside. 1, 2, 3. And each one has got the text. Cell 1, 1, cell 1, 2, cell 1, 3. Okay? Then it does the next row, and that's that one there. Okay? So from here, this area here is that row. This area here is the next row. And then this area here where the TR opens and then closes is the next row. And that's your table. Right. So if I was to add another section, another TR section, then that will automatically give me, so if I was to get rid of all of this and just add another section, copy paste this area here, okay, and I copy paste all of that underneath into this point here, that will automatically add another row at the bottom with my cells inside. Okay, good. Let's go have a look at now add another table. So here we can see what we were discussing before. We can see here that the first row has only got 1 TD, whereas the second row has got 3 TDs. So here we've got 1, 2, 3, and this has also got 1, 2, 3, whereas this one has only got 1 TD. It's only got 1 table data. Now remember we said that's impossible. It can look that way, but in actual fact that's not the structure of the table. This is actually a 3 by 3. So if we extend all the lines, that gives me 1, 2, and that one will be my third column. So how do we do that with HTML code? Well, essentially it's exactly the same as what we did before, but this time we've got another command to learn, and that is our colspan. And we can see the colspan here. Colspan equals 3. So what does this mean if we draw this out? And we'll do this a bit more quickly this time. We're going to start from the TR, which is here. Just get rid of that. So the TR basically says start the row. So the row begins here, and then it says it's going to span, it's going to start the first TD. So this is my TR. And that's where it's going to begin. And then it starts the first TD. And that's going to span over 3 columns. 1, 2, 3 columns. And then it's going to close. And then my TR is going to close as well. So essentially, that's going to look like this. It's going to be one long cell. We don't have any other TDs. Can you see? So here we've got the TR. That's where it opens. That's where it closes. And there's only 1 TD. There's only 1 table data. And it's going to span across 3. So it's going to span across these 3 virtual cells here. The next TR, however, begins here and it ends here, the next row. And in between, we've got 3 TDs. So that next row is going to look like this. And it's going to actually have 3. And that's the same with the third row. Starts there, finishes there, and it's going to span across 3 TDs. And we can see that like that. Okay, so this one is the same as that one. Let's go look at the next command. The next command is the rowspan. So it's exactly the same as the colspan, but this time we're going to see that it spans across 3 rows. So we're going to begin from here, and this time I'm going to draw it on the table here. So my TR, my row begins here and ends here. That's where the TR begins, and that's where the TR closes. So my points are, it begins here and it ends here. So after my TR begins, it has its first TD. it adds it. Here's my first TD. Then the next TD spans over 3 rows. Rows span 3. So it's going to start from here. It's going to span over 3 rows and place a TD. Now, the next one is another TD. It doesn't have a colspan or a rowspan, so that's going to be this one here. So my first row is actually this red outline. That essentially means if I take a blue pen now, my second row only has availability 2 TDs. This one and this one. In row 2. And that's why when we look at the second row, this is where the next TR begins and the next TR ends. In between, we only have 2 TDs. Now, these NBSP commands, these are just a non-breakable space. It's just a space. Basically, I don't have any text in here. But if I was to type in here the letter A, and in this one I was to type the letter B, then that would be A, and that would be B. Okay? And then again with the third row, you can see here, that's where the row begins, that's where the row ends. We've only got 2 TDs because that TD here is this one. We've got that one, actually it's stood in blue. So that's the one TD, and that's the other TD. Okay, so there are only 2. So if I was to write here C, and in here I was to put D, then that would look like this, C and D. Okay, so if I was to put here, for example, the number 1, 2, and 3, that will be 1, 2, and 3. So that's row span. Let's go look at this table now. Here we've got colspan and rowspan. So I'm just going to fly through this quickly for time's sake. So here we've got the first row is this one here. We've got only 1 TD, 1 table data. It spans across 3, and here it is here. So it's going to span across all 3 columns. The next one, TR, starts here, ends there. We've got 3 TDs. There they are. 1, 2, 3. The next one, this one here, and that's the one we're going to be a little bit careful of now. That's going to be TD. So there's the first TD. Then the next one is TD row span 2. So this one here is TD, and it spans over 2 rows. And then the next one is a TD. It's that one there. So my fourth row only has 2 TDs left. That one and that one. And there it is there. Okay, TD1 and TD2. Okay, we're going to look at this final table. This one is going to be a little bit more tricky. Same concept, however. All we're doing here, though, it's this was actually from a past paper, so you need to pay attention on this one. If we here to understand it a little bit easier, we're going to extend all the lines, okay, so we can see exactly how many rows and columns this table is made up of. So here's the first column line, here's the next column line, here's the next column line, because they actually tell you to design a table that looks like this. And most students get a little bit, find it a bit difficult creating this cell in the middle. And then we're going to extend the row lines as well. So there we go, 1. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. Okay? So with that in mind, if we have a look at this first row, here's my first TR, and that's where my TR closes. In between, I now have 2 TDs. Each one spans over 2 columns. Colspan 2, colspan 2. So there's that there. That's spanning over 2 columns. Column 1 and 2, and this is column 3 and 4. Okay? The next one is starts TR, closes TR. TD, it's 1 cell. So here's my 1 cell here. We're going to do this one in blue. There's my 1 cell, it's added in, TD. The next one is colspan 2, rowspan 2. So this is going to span across two columns, and here are the two columns. Can you see from here to here? Columns 2 and 3. It's going to span across here, 1, 2, and it's also going to span 2 rows down. So there we go, row span 2. So that's going to go 1, that's row 2 and 3. So that's that area there. That's 4 cells merged together. Okay, and then I've got my last TD here, which is that one there. Essentially now row 3 only has 2 TDs, and we can see that here. Here is row 3 between the 2 TRs, and I've got 2 TDs. There they are, 1 and 2. And then if we move over to the last one, I've got a very long cell here, and that spans over 4 columns. So it's got a col span of 4. So my row begins there, it ends there. There's only one TD, and that is 4. And that will go from one end and span across column 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. All right, so that's essentially tables. Now I've got one more thing I want to show you. I'm going to use this table here. Okay, so let's say I added down here another row or another column. So in this position here, I'm going to add another line, and I'm going to put this. Now that we know about colspan and rowspan, and I added this line in here, TD cell 1, 4, and then close that TD. What that would mean is I've actually added 1, 2, 3, 4 columns on the first one, but the other ones have only got 3. So what will this table look like? Well, essentially it's going to do this. It's going to add the other column here for the first one, and you'll have your text in here, cell 1, 4, and then it's just going to draw the border here, and that's it. So these here will be empty. You won't even see a border for the cells, but it's going to put the column there, the 4th column for the other 2 rows, for these 2 rows here. It's going to add the columns. It's going to be a virtual column. You're not going to see any data. You're not going to see any borders. You're just going to see the table border, which is going to look like this. And these are going to be empty here. So that's going to be an empty space. Okay, as I said, you cannot have more columns in one row than another row, and you cannot have more rows in one column than another column. Okay, so let's now go look at border collapse. So this is the command border collapse separate. This is the actual command that we're going to put in a CSS, a cascading style sheet. So when the property is set to border collapse, that's the property, and the parameter is set to separate, that means we get these double lines. Now here you can also see that I've put the border spacing. Because I've got the borders separate, I've also added some spacing so we can see which property does the horizontal spacing and which the vertical spacing. So we can see here then the next property is border spacing, 15 pixels and then 30 pixels. So the first number actually represents this horizontal spacing here. And we know that because I've deliberately made this number twice the size of this one. So one's 15, one's 30. So this smaller number is actually representing this horizontal spacing. And then the second number represents the vertical spacing. And we can see that all round. Okay. So that's going to be 30 pixels for all of them. And the horizontal spacing, these ones are all 15. So that's border spacing, border collapse separate. So these are going to be 15 pixels. Okay, now if we were to change this property and send it to border collapse, that's this property here. And now you can see this exact same cell, the exact same table with the command border collapse and the property set to collapse. In other words, the borders are collapsed. And you see here, we don't have any spacing. It's just one line, one border going all the way around and all the cells. So all of those table borders have now been merged together as one. Okay, that's everything you need to know about tables. Now it's time to have a look at tables in Dreamweaver so we can create the table and actually look at something about the width of the tables, and then implementing these properties and modifying the properties of the table using the CSS code, the cascading style sheets. Okay, so now we're going to create a new web page, a new HTML page, or HTML file to be correct, and I'm going to actually create the table using Dreamweaver. So I've started off by creating a folder on my desktop, and this folder is going to contain everything I need for this website or web page. Now I'm going to now open up Dreamweaver. I'm going to go to File, New, and I'm going to create a new HTML file. Now we've done this already in a previous tutorial, so I'm not going to waste too much time on this. To create a table, I'm going to go to Insert. I'm going to go to Table, and here I've got some properties. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. I'm just going to make this a 3x3 table. I'm going to make it 400 pixels wide. We're going to see the difference in a second, and the border thickness is 1. Click OK, and there's my table. Now I'm just going to add some data in here. So cell 1. Okay, and there's the last one. Now then, so I've got my cells, I've got them numbered, and this is the same kind of table we've already seen in the PowerPoint presentation before. Now, what do I want to notice? Well, first of all, we can see here that these are actually border collapse is set to separate. You can see these double lines. When I click inside the table, you can see these green lines that appear at the bottom, but I want you to notice down here in the properties area at the bottom. So if I click in my WYSIWYG here outside the table, we can see the properties change. If I click inside the table somewhere, we see some properties which are related to the area I've got selected. Now, very important and a nice little trick here for you is these little green lines here. You can see this green line here, this short green line represents, if I click on that, I select that column. Click on this one, it selects that column. These aren't so important. The important one is this line here. It represents the width of the table. When I click on this line, look at the properties down here. We see the properties which are related to the table itself. For example, we can see the width of the table. I can change that from 400 to 600. Now, when I click in here, there you go. It's changed. And because that table doesn't fit in this window size, I actually get the horizontal scroll bar here at the bottom. I'm going to click again on my table, click on the long green line. I'm going to change that now. Instead of 600 pixels, I'm going to change that to 50 for 50%. Now 50% means 50% of the window of the active window. So you can see this window is so big. If I change the size of this window, look what happens. You can see that my table is actually changing size and only using 50% of that active window. This is going to be the same when we look at it on a web page. So if I save this, File, Save, and I'm just going to call this, where am I? I've got it called Web Page, haven't I? Yep, there it is there. And I'm just going to call this Index. Now, if I go to Preview, there it is. It's been saved. Okay, let me just drag this up. You can see it's actually taking 50% of this window. Now, if I make that window smaller, look what happens to the size of that window. Can you see it's actually changing with the size of that window? If I make this now again fixed to, let's say 600, so I'm going to click on the long green line. There are my properties. I'm going to make that, let's say 800 pixels this time, not percent, because it's going to be really big. Save that, Control S to save, go to my browser and refresh. Look at that. Now, can you see this is 800 pixels? There it is. So from left to right, it's 800 pixels. And if the window gets smaller than the table, look at the bottom down here, you're going to see that scroll bar appear. There it is there. So now for me to view that whole table, I need to scroll left and right. So it really depends on what you want. Personally, I prefer using percentage size. Now again, I'm modifying the properties here from the HTML source code. I'm going to set that to 80%. And we can see here the properties here, table width 80%, border 1, and the other one I'm going to show you is the align. If I set the align to center, then it's going to put that table in the center of that window. And again, we can see in the source code, it's put that property. Width is 80%, border is 1, alignment is center. Now, again, we're going to be, I've undone that, so let me just go do that again. Click on the long green line and alignment center. Now, we're going to be applying, and the majority of things that we're going to be doing, we're going to be doing using CSS code. When we actually apply CSS code using a style sheet, and we've got conflicting arguments, for example, the one is saying it's 80% of the window and the other one saying it's 800 pixels, well, the value of the CSS style sheet is going to override the source code. So let's say here I've got, if I click here on the long green line, we see the borders here. It says, here's the other one, cell space. So if I put that to 0, no cell spacing, you can see there's 0 cell spacing. But if in the CSS code I actually put there's 10 points cell space, then it's actually going to apply 10 point cell spacing, even though in the source code it says it's 0. Okay, and the same with the alignment of the table and everything else. So let's just get rid of the cell spacing. Let's have a look at the cell padding. So if I was to put the padding here and turn that, if we look at the text here, look how close the letter C is to the border of that TD. So if I click on this long green line, go to here and say the cell padding is 15. Now when I click here, can you see it's actually 15 points in? And I can only write up to, go back, up to that point there. So 15 on the left, 15 on the right, left and right. Okay? Now again, we're modifying all of this through the HTML code, and that's not normally how we're going to do it. So I've shown you how to do it from there. Let's now go have a look at the style sheet. Let's create a style sheet and modify the different tags, the table tag, the TR tag, and the TD tag, so that we can modify all these properties from the style sheet. Okay, so our first step is now we're going to create a style sheet. Now we've already covered this, so I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm going to go to File, New. We're going to choose CSS for Cascading Style Sheet. There's my style sheet. I'm actually going to write my name in the comment here. Just put my initials, NP, center number CY12127, and the candidate number, let's say 12345. Now, I'm going to now save this, File, Save As, make sure it's saved in the same place as my HTML file. So it was in the folder Webpage, there it is there. I'm going to call this Style 1. If you're doing a paper, make sure you give the name it tells you. So there's Style 1, CSS style sheet created. Next step is I need to attach the style sheet to my HTML source code. Now to do this, I need to make sure that the properties section here is in the body area. So if I'm still here on the table and I'm seeing the properties of the table down here, that's not going to help me. I need to click in the body area, say this empty area here. That's going to show me the properties down here. I can go to class, attach a style sheet, browse, find my style sheet. Because it's saved in the same folder as the HTML file, it's going to open that folder straight away. Select that file and click OK. And OK. Now, first thing that I'm looking for now that it is attached is go to the source code, and if we see here, it's added this line right above the body area. So there's the body. Right above that, you've got the link from here to here. Link href style1.csf, and that CSS, that basically says you've attached the style sheet to this. And I know it's attached because if I look here, when I select my index HTML file at the top here, then I've got the source code and I've also got my style sheet. So I can, switch from one to the other very easily. Okay. I've also got the style sheet open up here, which I don't really need it here anymore, but I'm just going to leave it there. So let's go add some styles to the table tags. So the table tags are table, TD, and TR. TR we don't really bother with that much because it's the TD tags which are going to be formatted to display in certain ways. Let's have a border around it, have a background color, change the text or the font styles of the data which is inside the TDs. The TRs, they don't really have much of a purpose rather than contain the TDs. So let's go to style 1. I'm going to come over here to my CSS designer area in my properties. I'm going to click on add selector. I'm going to choose for table. Press enter and enter, and here's my first tag, the table tag. Now from my properties area, I need to make sure that this here where it says show set is not checked, so I need to make sure that's removed so I can see all the properties. The first property I'm going to have a look at, and remember we've got the categories here, we've got the layout, we've got the text, borders and background color. So the first thing that I'm going to have a look at is to add a border, a width of a border, and play around with the width of the table. So first off, I'm going to try the width. Here's the width of the table. Remember, in the source code, we said that the width of the table is actually 80%. We can see that there, and we can see it here. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to change the width of the table from auto. I'm going to change it to, say, 650 pixels. As soon as I click outside, can you see now, this table now has adjusted to 650 pixels. Look at that, it says 80%, and then it's got 649, which is supposedly 650 pixels. So that automatically tells me that this code, the source code in the HTML file, is being overridden by the style sheet. Okay, so whatever we've got in here will be overridden by the style sheet if we've got conflicting arguments. So let's go back to the style sheet. I'm just going to change that back to, let's say, I can either delete that and leave it from the HTML source code, but if the paper demands that you actually set the width based on the style sheet, you need to add it. So I'm just going to change that to percentage. I'm just going to give it a different percentage than before, not 650. I'm going to make it 85%, and that will be okay. All right, just so that we can see a different value for the style sheet and a different one in the source code. Right, next thing I'm going to have a look at in the table is, right, let's align the table to the center. So right now, my table, if we look at the source code and I click on that long green line, we can see its default alignment. Okay, so I could change it from here and put it center aligned or put it right aligned. I'm going to leave it as default, and from the style sheet, I'm going to show you how to align the table. So we do that from here, from the margin. Now, because the table is the whole table, everything inside the table, the TDs and TRs. So since if we align the table to the center, everything goes with it. So if we put the margin here to automatic and put this one to automatic, then what it's going to do, because it's a percentage and it's set at 85%, you've got 15% which is empty. So it's going to take that 15%, divide it by 2 and automatically put it left and right. And there you go. You can see now if I change the size of my window, my table moves and it is aligned to the center and it's 85%. It says 80% because that's what's in the source code, but the actual layout says it's 85, and that's what it will be. And we can see that here in the style. Okay. Let's go add a background color to my table. So I'm going to go here to the background color. I'm going to choose a slightly off grayish, a little bit reddish, gray colorish there, and just click away. And there we go. I've got that background there. Now, the reason I've done that is because we're going to see when we actually put background color on the TDs, we can see how the background colors are affected if it's the table and if it's on the TD. So that's that. Let's go to the borders. Now what I'm going to do for the borders, I'm going to turn around and say here that my border width is going to be, let's say, pixels, and I'm going to make that, say, I don't know what, oh, that's a bit high, 4 there. And we can see that the border width around my table now has changed to 4. So if I actually increase that, I can change it from here, make that 10, and click over here. You can see how thick. Now, the border of the table is just the outside, the perimeter border, not the borders of the TDs. Okay, remember, we've got that double line here still. So let's go back now and just change that. I think that's a bit too thick. Let's just change that down to, let's say, 3 pixels. Okay, there we go. Now, the next one is style. The style, I'm going to say a solid line, so it's going to be a solid straight line, and I'm going to make that color, let's say, a bright red. There we go. If I wanted to choose a dotted line or a double line, there you go, that's a double line. And you've also got a dotted or a dashed line. There's a dashed line for you. Okay, so depending on what's required or what's been asked, I'm going to leave that solid. Now the radius, I've never seen them ask anything about the radius before, but if I actually click on this one here, it does all four corners. It will basically round off the radius of that table. So if I was to increase that to, let's say, I say 10. Now you don't see anything happening here because we're in design view, but if I go to live view, there you go. Can you see it's actually giving me a 10-point radius curve around that outside border. So you can only see that if it's live, or if I save this, Control S to save my style sheet, go back to source code, Control S to save that as well. Now I go to my browser. Let's just open this up in the browser, double click. So here's my browser. Let me switch over screens. There's my browser. Can you see that? So that's giving me 80% of the window, and I've got the radius, I've got the background color, I've got the thick red border. Okay, so here I'm going to add now, if we go have a look at my styles, there's my designer here, and if we click here, we can see that in the borders, nothing has been set for border collapse. Okay, for the property border collapse, and I can see here nothing's been set for border collapse. So by default, it's using the border collapse as separate. Now, if I now change this from border collapse to collapse instead of separate, look at that. Look at the table now. Can you see the borders of those TDs have now merged and you've got single lines. Now, if I was in design view now, you don't actually see that happening. Although the property is here, we can see that there. It won't display it in the design view. You have to go to the live view. You're either going to go to the live view, or you can go, if I press Control S now to save, and I switch over now to my browser, and now when I refresh my browser, you can see it's actually border collapse. There you go. You see that there? Okay, so let's go back. So if I change this property now, so if I come over here and I delete this property, so there you go, I've deleted it, border collapse property has gone. I'm going to put it to border separate, okay? And if I save this, well, that's border separate. Let's just go see it on my Control S, and let's just go see it again, change here in the browser. There we go, there you go, border separate. You can see those double lines. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave it as border separate, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to, while I'm in live view, so I can actually see this happening live, I'm going to change the border spacing. So if I increase this, have a look what happens. Look at that. Can you see that as I change the size? So that first number is the horizontal spacing. So if I move that to, let's say, 28, and then the second number, that's going to be my vertical spacing. You see that? There we go. So if I do Control S and go back to my browser window and do a refresh, I can also see my table in the browser view. So let's go back. Now I'm going to change the color. I'm going to modify a little bit the TDs now. So everything I've done now has been on the table properties. We've done the width, the margin, so we can align. We've done background colors. We've done the borders. We've done a radius, and we've also messed around with the border collapse and the border spacing. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add my next tag. So I'm going to click down here. I'm going to go to plus on the selector and choose TD. And enter, and there's my TD tag. So in the TD tag, we can of course modify the text. Now the text is going to modify what the text inside the TDs actually look like. Now we've done modification of text, so I'm not going to work with that too much. I'm just going to change this to, let's say, a dark green color. I'm using all these funky colors here so we can actually see the property in the table. So there's my dark green color there. I can do things like font weight, or make something bold. Let's I don't know, make it bold there. And I've also got text align. I can put that to the center. All right, let's go look at borders. So if I go to the borders now and I modify the borders now, I can do let's say let's do points this time. So now points are usually for text size and pixels are for graphics, but you know, in these papers, some of these exam papers, I think they mix them up, so I'm going to do the same as well. So I'm just going to change that there. Now I haven't got a color set, so it's actually picking up the color from the table. So if I change this color to, let's say, a blue, and click away, and I'm going to choose a dashed line. There you go. Now I'm also going to go to my background and give a, what color should we put now? A background color of the TD. So let's put a, I think a yellowy color. Let's just put a light yellow there, and there we go. So we've now got our table. We've modified the table tag, we've modified the TD tags, we've put borders, we've done everything. If I just do a Control S now, go to my browser and do a refresh, look at that funky table with a radius as well. Okay, so that's, I think, everything that you need to know about tables, applying the style sheets to tables and modifying the tags of tables. So I hope you've learned something new. If you haven't, watch the video again, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.